Welcome again, everybody, mostly ladies. So beautiful to see so many of you guys here today. And thank you so much for joining the Progressive Woman in Business Luncheon today. Hosted, thank you to PBF and MTN and the Mail and Guardian. Just to introduce myself to start off with today, I am Atandi Wesaba. I am the Mail and Guardian Deputy Editor. And I'm quite excited to be here. Before I tell you all, guys, all about the reasons why we are super excited to host this luncheon today, I do just want to cover some house rules. Please do keep the clicking and clanking of the forks and knives and the plates to a minimum, please. We are live on Facebook this morning and for the rest of the speeches of today. So lots of people hopefully are watching and engaging with today's session. So I'm quite excited, as I said, to be directing this program today. And I think as the Mail and Guardian, we've had a really, really interesting couple of weeks interacting with so many women's stories, their struggles, their wins, their victories. This past week, actually, we released the Mail and Guardian 50 women list, and we were celebrating those 50 women. And as the deputy editor, there's a lot of work that goes into putting that particular supplement together and celebrating all of those women. And so I get to interact with some of the amazing stories, the trials and tribulations of women in South Africa and what they are achieving in so many different sectors. So it was for me to be part of this as well and celebrating women and listening. And I'm quite excited to listen to some of the speeches that we're going to be having today and the kinds of women that can stand in different sectors of our country and of our world, and that we are celebrating today. So secondly, I'd just like to thank PBF again and MTN for this particular partnership, as we partnered with this year with the Mail and Guardian to celebrate the role of women in all sectors of our society. Before I go into all the exciting speeches, actually that's not my job. It's Sipho Mbele's job, and I want to introduce him. He is the convener of PBF, and he's going to be saying some words for us, and he's going to just give us a little glimpse of who we're going to be hearing from today. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Program Director, the Deputy Secretary General of the African National Congress, Comrade Jesse Duarte, Comrade Phoebe in absentia, Comrade Doneba, the convener of the NYTT, Ms. Jacob O'Sullivan from MTN, our media partners, Mail and Guardian, honored guests, ladies, welcome. And ladies and gentlemen, ladies, welcome. Welcome to the Progressive Business Forum Luncheon. The PBF, as a program of the African National Congress, is honored to host the special annual Progressive Women in Business event during the Women's Month, as we pay tribute to more than 20,000 women who marched to Union Building on the 9th of August 1956 in protest against the extension of the past laws against women. The PBF, as our subscribers will be aware, that we run a program that manages various initiatives. One of those programs include the ministerial briefings. Every month we host different ministers. We engage with the ministers on topical issues that affect business community, the investors. We also have what we call the research and roundtables. As we speak today, we're in the process of finalizing the partnership with University of Johannesburg, so that the University of Johannesburg, as an academic institution, can assist us with ideas, particularly the Faculty of Economics Business. We'll also be partnering with University of Johannesburg on training, particular for our subscribers. So we want to encourage our subscribers and everyone who wants to be part of PBF that let's use this opportunity. We'll also be working with University of Johannesburg Business School. We also host business summits. One of the planned summits that we'll be hosting very soon is on energy. And I'm hoping that we'll see a number of women who are here today because energy has become the biggest issue in our economy. We'll be partnering with various players sometime in October, November to have the discussion about the energy. We organize skills and training programs for our partners. We're also involved in the trade exhibition, trade facilitations program. Last month we hosted the Kenyan community where we hosted the webinar where we're engaging with Kenya. We're also planning to host the Russian, where we'll be discussing the issues of the ICT. We'll also be hosting Indian High Commissioner where we'll be engaging. Our approach as Progressive Business Forum, we are saying that South Africans must start doing business outside South Africa, outside the boundaries of this country, because there are opportunities out there, particularly in the continent. And we must also leverage on our strength because the Secretary General of AFTA is from our own country. So those are the opportunities that as South Africans, particularly women, we must start to leverage on. Today is a day of celebration. That's why I want to emphasize this point. We are celebrating the role of women in society and the journey we have traveled as a country for women emancipation. This year we celebrate the 150th anniversary of the birth of one of the South African most remarkable and pioneering leaders, Charlotte Mcgregor. She was the first Black South African woman to obtain a science degree, was a delegate to the ANC founding conference in 1912, and was a founder of the Bantu Women's League, a forerunner to the ANC Women's League. She made an exceptional contribution to the struggle for the liberation of women in South Africa and challenged the contemporary attitude about the place of women in politics, society, and the economy. She was a fearless leader who organized the first defiance campaign against the pass system, mobilizing women to ban their passes. She organized farm workers and domestic workers and dedicated her life to improving the conditions under which African women lived. In his remarks on the 9th of August, the President Ramaphosa said, "We have declared 2021 as a year of Charlotte Manya Mcgregor, a courageous women's rights activist and also a leader who was born 150 years ago. We celebrate this year of her birth because we want to encourage the women of this country to follow her example and to follow in her footsteps. We celebrate the resolve of these women to determine their own destiny. At the same time, we pay tribute to today's generation of women. We welcome you to this special event today and extend our gratitude and appreciation for your attendance and participation with leaders of the ANC, convergence, and other leaders who are present, women leaders in government, leading women business representatives, the academics are here, and entrepreneurs. Today's luncheon seeks to do justice to continuing this journey of ensuring the crucial role of women in our country. With your participation today, we are confident it will do so. Ladies, we have the bags. In the bags, you'll find the goodies. We also have the latest edition of the Women magazine. We have dedicated this women to we've dedicated our magazine to women. It includes different contributions to this special edition, including women holding key positions in government, in our movement, and corporate world. These articles deals with issues that speak to the critical role of women in our country. Some of the authors are here in the room and are here to celebrate this day with us. I commend these editions to you as a tribute to all women everywhere. Thank you again for being here. We are honored with your presence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sipho. That was a very enlightening conversation and speech from you about the role of women and the role of women over the years. Because I think in this day and age, we're not just celebrating what women are doing now, but have consistently done for decades. Today we had Phoebe Potgieter, who wanted to be here. She is the GM of the ANC. She really wanted to be here, but was unable to. But she has sent us a message from her that she is recorded for us this morning, and we'll start off our speeches with her and her video that she has sent through. Thank you very much.
Good morning to PBF and all the participants, the Deputy Secretary General of the ANC, Ms. Jessie Duarte, and all the leadership of women's organizations, business women. It is such an honor to be addressing the Women's Month event of the Progressive Business Forum. And what I want to do is to firstly reflect on where we're coming from. 2021, we are celebrating 150 years since the birth of one of the pioneers of Pan-Africanism, pioneers of freedom, of liberation, and of the rights of women, Mam Charlotte Mcgregor. She was born at a time when women didn't have the vote, at the height of colonialism and slavery. And despite all of those disadvantages that she faced, she went on to be the first African woman to obtain a BSc degree. She became a social worker. She found churches. She found schools. She was advisors to royalty. She just did so many amazing things, in addition to being the only woman representative at the ANC founding conference in 1912. And as we celebrate 150 years of her life, we need to look at what contribution she made and what we can learn from her examples as we look at the ongoing struggle for the economic emancipation and the liberation of women. The second important anniversary that we're celebrating this year is that it's also 65 years since Women's Day, since we have that historic march of over 30,000 women and even more tens of thousands of women that were prevented from coming to the march, who went to the Union building and put forward their demands that we will not be restricted to being second-class citizens, that we will not be restricted to, on an ongoing basis, responsible for the children in the reserves, for labor that's being discarded by the apartheid colonial government and business, and so forth. So women on the 9th of August 1956 marched in support of all of these demands. But more importantly, 2 years earlier, the Federation of South African Women, that also organized the march, at their founding conference adopted a women's charter, the first women's charter in the country. And it's very important what they said in the preamble, and I read: "We, the women of South Africa, wives and mothers, working women and housewives, African Indians, Europeans, and colored, hereby declare our aim of striving for the removal of all laws, regulations, conventions, and customs that discriminate against us as women and that deprive us in any way of our inherent right to the advantages, responsibilities, and opportunities that society offers to any one section of the population." Now, if you look at this preamble, it is just so loaded with the philosophy that has inspired the women's movement in our country. For one, they're talking about both women's in the multiplicity of roles that they play: wives, mothers, working women, housewife, the non-racial character of the Federation of South African Women, but also the fact that it recognized that patriarchy is not just advance in one way. It's through customs, it's through laws, it's through regulations, conventions that forms the foundation of the discrimination against women. And therefore they demand in the preamble that this is an inherent right to the advantages, responsibilities, and opportunities that society offers to any one section of the population. So thus a demand for full equality. And it's quite amazing that this was in 1954 when FETSO adopted this Women's Charter, and it still forms the philosophy that informs the women's movement today. We're also celebrating Women's Month this year on the occasion of the 26th anniversary of the historic Beijing conference that happened in 1995 in China, Beijing. And on that occasion, women from across the country came together from, the developing world, from the developed world. We had a really, really strong delegation from the African continent. There was preparatory meetings that were held on the continent to look at what our demands that we're going to put forth were. And eventually the delegations gathered at Beijing. And the Beijing Platform of Action brought together the various strands of the women's movement and the feminist movement, the strands of radical feminism, the strand of socialist feminism, the strands of African feminism, as well as the various strands that the women's movement were fighting for across the world as delegations gathered in Beijing in 1995. And that platform formed the basis of the advancement of women throughout the world for gender equality. We see that a number of those components of the Beijing Platform of Action was incorporated into the Maputo Protocol that the African Union adopted for gender equality, similarly the SADC Gender Protocol. But it also continued to inspire women, business women, women in rural areas, women in Afghanistan today, women across the world, as well as South African women, to be able to continue the struggle for gender equality. At the beginning of this year in March, the World Economic Forum published their annual Gender Gap Index. And what it does is to look at 4 indicators or 4 broad areas where they measure gender advancement in gender equality, and then to look at how countries progress, but also how as a global community we progress. And one of the things that they said in the 2021 Gender Gap Index is that it will take us yet another generation before we achieve full gender equality. So it will take us another 132 years before we, at the current pace of change, before we were able to achieve full gender equality. I also look at the statistics for South Africa. On some areas we're doing well. For example, we are ranked number 8 in the world when it comes to political empowerment, and this is why it's so important that on the score of local government elections, we are able to bring in as many women as possible as local councillors. But this index looks at issues as the number of women parliamentarians, councillors, as well as the number of women cabinet ministers in the public sector and so forth. So we're doing not bad. And in fact, African countries find themselves in the top 10. For example, Rwanda is number 1 in the world on the political index. But when it comes to other areas, we're not doing too well. On educational achievement, South Africa ranked number 42. So we're doing well on areas such as access to enrollment in secondary education. The gender gap is more or less beginning to close. Even enrollment in tertiary education and the number of women and men that graduate from tertiary education. Of course, it has to be disaggregated a little bit more because we need to look at which are the areas that women graduate from in tertiary education. It tends to be mainly in education, social sciences, etc., and much less women in agricultural sciences, for example, as well as in the STEM areas. But at least in terms of absolute numbers, we're beginning to close the gender gap. Similarly, in the enrollment of secondary education. But there's 2 aspects of that index that's very worrying that we are doing really badly. One of them is literacy rates. 27 years after democracy, we still rate 179 out of about 158 countries. And that's not good. And the reality is that the majority of people who are still not able to read and write are women. And we need to look at how do we break that chain of illiteracy. The second one that's even worse in terms of educational attainment index is the one about enrollment in primary education, that we're not doing well in terms of closing the gender gap. Now, when we look at break down the figures, it's not so much that we don't get our kids into primary school, but that they get into primary school, and particularly girls, without access to early childhood development. And this is why the commitment in the 2019 manifesto of the ANC is so important, to greatly expand ECD. But in addition to that, that once that they may have started grade 1, but the dropout rate for girls in primary education is just a massive, massive problem. And that is why we only ranked 107 in the world. And we need to look at, as women, as progressive men, we need to look at why is that the case. And some research has been done about it and what can be done about it. But with regards to economic participation and opportunity index, South Africa is also not doing too badly on some of those things. For example, when it comes to professional and technical workers, if one look at the access, and again, these figures need to be disaggregated. We seem to be doing well in the top 10, but as I say, it needs to be disaggregated because we need to find out, are women getting into the historic areas where there have been a glass ceiling, or where they are just at the bottom of the rung in terms of the glass labyrinth as it get to know. So we need to look at that, but we're not doing too badly. Also on the question about the poverty gap, and that is looking at estimate earned income, we're number 45 in the world. And again, given South African realities, we have to disaggregate that by race. We have to disaggregate that on the basis of where these are. Is it in rural provinces? The gap between township and town, etc., etc. So we need to disaggregate this. Labour force participation rate, we're also not doing too bad. Well, we're not doing great because we're number 80 in the world. And we know that with the recent figures that have come out about unemployment, that we have a massive problem as a result of COVID, both whether you take the narrow definition of unemployment or the expanded definition of unemployment, which include workers that are discouraged. On a gender component, we're not doing well. And particularly because women tend to find themselves in sectors that are affected by the impact of COVID-19, the informal sector and SMMEs. It does mean that labour force participation and therefore the ability of women to participate in the economy has been greatly affected. But one of the areas that I found quite surprising, two areas. One of them is on the level of legislature, senior officials and managers, we are 89 in the world. And remember I said earlier when we spoke about the political index that we're doing well, we're in the top 10. But what this showed is that we may be doing well in the public sector, where about 40 to and over percentage of our legislatures and even public sector managers may be women. And we have seen some slight backs in these areas. But when it comes to managers in the private sector, it brings our overall average down significantly. And of course, we need to look at it, and an organization like PBF needs to look at how does it join hands with business organizations, with women in the business sector to be able to be much more proactive in terms of how we ensure that we advocate and push for the employment equity legislation and regulations to have an impact, so that we also move up in this area and women are able to get out of just being, just below that level of managers, but not quite making it into the managerial area. The area that we're doing worse in the economic index is on the wage equality for similar work and what we refer to as the gender pay gap. We are number 131 in the world. That is, I mean, we should be ashamed of ourselves. 131 out of 156 countries. In terms of equal work for equal pay for work of equal value. And it means that we will have to, for us to be ranking so badly and poorly on this index, it means that we will have to look at all different sectors. It means that it's a problem across the board in all different aspects, at a managerial level, at a professional level, at a technical level, at a basic level in terms of entry level. It affects internships, it affects SMMEs, it affects the informal sector. It's in manufacturing, it is in mining, it's in the financial sector, it is in tourism. It affects every single sector of our society for us to be ranked so low. And this is why the proposals from structures like the ANC Women's League and other women's organizations to say that it's necessary for us to not just advocate for the closure of the gender pay gap, also to make sure that we disaggregate wages in the different sectors, that the Employment Equity Act, as well as other statistics released by the Statistics South Africa and businesses, must ensure that we gender disaggregate this information, because this would seem to be quite a hidden issue. I mean, I was personally quite shocked when I saw that we ranked 131 in the world out of 158 countries. So it means that it is one of our biggest challenges that we face, in addition to unemployment, and a big driver of inequality in our countries. And as a society, we therefore need to advocate much more vociferously for the closing of this gender pay gap. In conclusion, I've looked at the educational attainment in very broad sweepstakes, as well as economic participation and opportunity. But I do think that we need to look at what needs to be done about it, so that we don't just focus on this issue during Women's Month, but as we say, 365 days of the year, we need to focus on these issues and ensure that we take it forward. We need to form coalitions as women, and particularly coalitions of women around these issues of the economic emancipation of women and the educational emancipation of women, things that Charlotte Mcgregor and the generation of the 1956 women have struggled for, that they have advocated for, and that they have laid the foundation on, and we stand on the shoulders of those women that have drafted the Women's Charter, and that said that we need to make sure that we address gender inequality in all aspects of human endeavor. Thank you very much, and I wish you a fruitful meeting.
Back to what the likes of Charlotte Mcgregor fought for back in those days, and 65 years ago, the Women's March as well, taking us back there and what women were fighting for at that time and what we still have to fight for now. There's so much work that still needs to be done. And I think every single woman in whatever sector you are in, you know that there's still a lot of work to be done. And not just for us right now, but still generations to come. It's still going to take a while to get the gender pay gap smaller and smaller until everybody is being paid exact same amount for the exact amount of work as well. Lots of work still to be done, and I loved what Mamporgita had to say about the likes of the Progressive Business Forum and the work that they need to still do, and the work that we still need to do in the different sectors that we're in, and the groups that we start to formulate in those different sectors. Thank you so much for that important message. And moving along to one of the biggest companies in South Africa and Southern Africa. Jackie O'Sullivan, can we hear from you? And thank you so much for joining us today.
Mark. Good afternoon, ladies. It's such an honor to be here today. To Comrade Deputy Secretary General Jessie Duarte, it's a great joy to see you again and to have you with us here today. Mcgregor from the Claudi from the ANC Youth League. Atandibe, thank you so much. It's lovely to have the Mail and Guardian as our media partners in this event. First of all, I'd like to say, how many of you are wearing heels for the first time today in about 16 months? I'm still trying to figure them out. I wore them every day for 20 years, and now suddenly I'm feeling a little uneasy. There's two things I'd like to do today. First of all, there's three things. My first thing is to thank you for allowing MTN to sponsor this event. The second thing is to do a little bit of business, because you cannot pass up an opportunity to speak to powerful women about our own business, our business of MTN. And then I would like to tell a little bit of a story about some research that I did into the Women's March, and it all started with two pictures, and it involves fashion. So I shall get to that in just a moment. So first I have to do the business. Yesterday, and we were hoping that our minister might be able to join us, and I understand she's exceptionally busy in her new role. Now, yesterday, our regulator, ICASA, had announced that the temporary spectrum that had been allocated to the operators in order to assist us during the lockdown and the pandemic basically needs to be returned within the next 3 months. Now, there's some interesting things that I'd like to just quickly share about this. First of all, with all of us moving home, this is quite a remarkable statistic. The data traffic that we are dealing with as MTN, as is Vodacom and Telkom, the data traffic has doubled since we all went into lockdown. Interestingly enough, if I mentioned this earlier, if you went to look at where the amount of data is at the moment, the biggest amount of data is being sold by the red guys, by Vodacom, and by the blue guys, Telkom. This proposed duopoly that exists is in fact not a duopoly. It is in fact a figment. The data is sitting there, and we are obviously being asking people to pay for this data, and we know that we have consistently been trying to drop the prices of data for all South Africans over the last few years. Now, as a consequence of this temporary spectrum that we've been given, we've been able to lower the price of data just in the last year, just 2021 alone, by more than 30%. That's over and above what we agreed as a voluntary agreement with the Competition Commission. But traffic is up 165%. So we need to understand this pandemic is not yet over. I was delighted this morning to see that the numbers have dropped, but a 5,000 person infection rate, considering the underreporting that is still happening, is obviously still a huge concern to us, and we do not see people going back to work in the near future. What we've been able to do with the spectrum, just quickly, we've been able to give 5 million South Africans free access to educational resources. Now, my colleague from the MTN Foundation here, our General Manager, Kusile Tarira Hairoatsi, is here, and Kusile, we're about to launch a completely free education platform that is completely backed by the Department of Education. It has full curriculum. It will be zero rated. But currently we have 5 million people, 5 million young people that are using zero rated websites to be able to study and to supplement their studies. We cannot continue to offer that if the temporary spectrum is removed in 3 months' time. And what we're really waiting for is for the release of the high demand spectrum, which has been tied up through a number of legal ramifications. But the fact is the state of national disaster remains in place. Now, the suspension of this temporary spectrum will come at considerable cost. We have spent billions of rands to make sure that we could cater for this temporary spectrum. This was incredibly important to us because we needed to make sure that young people were able to continue their studies in this lockdown period. We cannot, This infrastructure would then be left idle if we take away this temporary spectrum. And I also want to just remind everyone in the room, this temporary spectrum has helped us launch 5G. We have not just launched 5G in Sandton, we have also launched it in Port Alfred, in Hopetown, in Virginia, in Queenstown, and in Sabatsane. So let us understand that there are ramifications to the removal of this temporary spectrum. I cannot stress enough, spectrum is the lifeblood of the telecommunications industry. It's what water is to farmers. That is what spectrum is to the telco industry. The telco industry is in this incredibly unique position to be able to genuinely transform lives. We have it in our hands to bridge the digital divide. We have consistently continued to reduce prices, and we have said we absolutely will. Customers will see significant pricing decreases when spectrum is allocated to the operators. We are simply looking for a fair and equitable allocation to participate in the 4G spectrum that previously wasn't allocated, as well as the 5G frequencies. We have to build world-class infrastructure. We have to bridge the digital divide. If we don't do that, this country will once again be left behind, and we should not have to do that. We have all the capacity, all the brain power, and all the infrastructure to change the way our entire country, no matter where they are located, interacts with the digital environment. We should not be limiting people based on location or income. The unbanked should be able to be banked. And this is what telecommunication brings. So that is what I would like to call getting the business done. Thank you for that. Now I'm going to talk about a subject that absolutely fascinates me. So I'm delighted to have the opportunity to talk to you today about this subject that I stumbled upon as a consequence of my observation around fashion. Now, I obviously understand and thank the PBF for having invited us to sponsor this. And obviously we understand why August is chosen as Women's Month. And it's been mentioned many times that the march to the union buildings to protest the hated pass laws, which impose these hideous restrictions on the movement of Black people. This year, as has been said, it was the 65th anniversary of this impressive act of defiance. But what I'd like to do is just to take a couple of minutes to highlight some issues that have been overlooked, I believe, in this telling of this story of amazing bravery. There are probably some of you in this room who already know this, and to those of you, I apologize. I have found, however, that this is something that many people that I've relayed this to have not been aware of. So the first issue is the number of women that were on the march in 1956. So go to any of the number of history websites, you can go through any of the news archives, and you'll always find information that 20,000 women were on the march. Now, if you're listening very carefully to Comrade Phoebe, you would have heard she had said 30,000. Now, in fact, Comrade Phoebe is on the money here, because the figure that constantly keeps getting reported in media and through history books and websites is around 20,000, but there were far more than 20,000 women. It's difficult to count the exact number because the photographs concentrate obviously on the struggle heroes that were leading them, Lillian Ngoyi and Helen Joseph and Rahima Musa and Sophie Williams, because she hadn't got married yet. But I recently listened to this really wonderful account of the march, which was given by the indomitable Ruth Mpati. She passed away in 2015 after having lived this exceptional life in the struggle and in all other areas of her life. And in her account of that day, Mama Ruth explained how she was one of the women who was tasked with counting all of the individual petitions that the women had to sign to get around the prohibitions that had been put in place in the march, which was basically that you had to have your own petition. So as Mama Ruth tells the story, she and one other colleague, they counted literally each page as the women arrived at the amphitheatre. And it was a very time-consuming job. And Lillian Ngoyi and Helen Joseph started to get worried that the police would break up the protest protest before they could hand over the petitions. So they urged the counters to kind of speed up their work. So they stopped counting when they hit 20,000, and they gave those petitions to the leaders, who then marched to the union buildings, and they put them at Prime Minister J.D. Stratham's door, who obviously was not there because, you know, he ran away from the scary women. So in her story, Mama Ruth estimated that a further 30,000 petitions were not counted. And she says more women continue to arrive by train at the union buildings, at the amphitheatre. So we have this really wonderful eyewitness account of the size of the crowd. So I think we should probably reflect more accurately the fortitude and the determination of the women who were there on that day 65 years ago. There weren't 20,000 women on that march. The figure is probably more than double that. There were well over 50,000 women who were prepared to defy the authorities and march to the seat of the apartheid government. And in the words of Helen Joseph, she said, "We shall not rest until we have won for our children their fundamental right to freedom, justice, and security." Now, the second issue that's overlooked is that on the 9th of August 1956, the women were marching to the union buildings for the second time. The march we celebrate every year was not the first time the women had shown such courage and defiance on the steps of the union buildings. They had done it before. Now, the reason why I came across this was because I noticed that in the various media coverage every year around Women's Day, around the march, there were two pictures that were used interchangeably. And I couldn't understand, why would women change their outfits halfway through a protest? It just doesn't seem right. Yes, I understand it if you're hosting Miss South Africa and you're the MC, but not really a women's march. So that's kind of where I started researching, and my husband is a terrible history nerd, and we've got every book that's ever been written about sort of the 1940s up until now in South Africa at home. So we started the great investigation of the march. So the previous year, in August of 1955, the Federation of South African Women had a special conference, and one of the ANC Women's League members, Margaret Gazel, made the bold call from the floor that the women should go to the union buildings to protest the oppressive laws, and they should sleep there. And she went further, saying no one should leave the union buildings until their demands were met. Now, this was met, as you would imagine, with great enthusiasm, until the practicalities were contemplated. And this is something that Helen Joseph talks about in her book, Side by Side. She says that men might not have foreseen the practicalities, but the practicalities were around toilets. The women realized there would be no toilets for an indefinite stay at the union buildings, and a more realistic view prevailed, and they said, well, perhaps we should reduce this to one day only. Now, this is when the momentous decision was actually taken. This is the first time the decision was taken. This is the historic moment when women decided to rise up against the apartheid government. This happened in August 1955 and not 1956. The following month, on the 27th of October 1955, a day that most history books have overlooked, if you Google Women's March, it will always take you to 1956. So the history books have probably overlooked it, perhaps if not forgotten, because it was quite difficult to get to all of this information. Thousands of women marched for the very first time to the union buildings. In the days before the protest, they had to overcome many obstacles that were thrown in their way by the authorities, as had become something that women expected at that time. The Pretoria Transportation Board denied them access to the buses. They were going to hire buses, and they weren't allowed to do that. So then the women had to use public transport, which means it was going to take them a huge amount of time, a lot longer to get there. So the women had to be informed that they needed to rearrange their transport. And of course, this is not the days of cell phones, and obviously in townships there weren't many telephones, so there had to be a kind of a word of mouth spreading to say, look, we can't get the buses. But of course the message got through, because where there is a will, there is a way, and there is always a way with women. And another lovely story from Helen Joseph was that she recalled driving to Orlando early in the morning of the 27th of October and seeing on the railway embankment a train packed with women singing, their arms out the window in the Congress salute, telling the world that they were on their way to Pretoria. So it was a hot day in October. The women sat under their umbrellas as Lillian Ngoyi and Helen Joseph and Rahima Musa and Sophie Williams took the piles of the petitions and left them outside the minister's offices, who, would you believe, had also disappeared because they too were scared of the women. So this is why I had come to this issue, was if you looked at the two photos and wondered why Helen Joseph, Sophie Williams, and Rahima Musa had changed their clothes. Okay? So there are photographs from that first march, which are always attributed to the second march. So as I said, if you Google the Women's March photographs and have a look at the photographs, this is very specific. I'm sorry, Sipho, we're getting a bit pedantic here about fashion. But in some of them, Helen Joseph is wearing a black jacket, which was 1955. Then in others, she's wearing a white blouse, and that was 1956. In some, Sophie Williams is wearing her ANC Women's League uniform, which was 1955, and in others, she's wearing a T-shirt, a cardigan, and a long skirt, and that was 1956. Comrade Duarte understands. She knows the story. I had a feeling she would. Rahima Musa is also wearing different saris, but of course, because the pictures are in black and white, it's not that obvious. You have to really want to be a nerd about these things. Lillian Ngoyi wears her ANC Women's League uniform at both events. And also, you'll notice the size of the protest letters change. So there are huge piles in 56, smaller piles in 55, because there were less petitions at the time. And also what's interesting is the protest in 1955 was not just against the pass laws. Women were there to protest against a range of unlaws, the ghetto housing, the forced removals, the Bantu education, the same poverty we fight now, and of course the pass laws. And in that letter of demand on that historic day, the women wrote in their petition, "We must speak from our hearts as mothers, as women. We must love and marry and find a home. We must bear children in hope and in pain. We must help them grow. We must endure all the longing and suffering of motherhood. Because of this, we are made strong to come here, to speak for our children, to strive for their future." So after the petitions were dumped, Lillian Ngoyi couldn't make a speech because that was obviously forbidden. She told the crowd that the minister had run away. And then Lillian Ngoyi led the women in singing of Nkosi Sikelel. And then they dispersed. And then 10 months later, the women were back. But now they knew how to do it at scale. And like all things women do, they did it bigger and they did it better. They knew how to sign their own petitions, they knew how to use the public transport, they knew the ministers would run away and they wouldn't have to worry about them. They were certainly emboldened by their protests of the 27th of October, and they knew they would be bigger and stronger and louder in their protest. And that's why we remember the 9th of August, 1956, because of the sheer volume of the women who raised their voices. But let us reflect that history underplays the number of people that were there that day. And let us also reflect that there were 2 marches to the Union buildings, and that the 27th of October 1955 deserves its rightful place in their history in the struggle against apartheid and the empowerment of women. Thank you so much.
Wow, Jackie. I didn't want to get back up here. I just wanted to continue listening to the story. Oh, you're such a brilliant storyteller. Thank you so much, Jackie. And one of the things that came from Jackie's speech right now is getting the business done. As women, we have to get the business done. You're getting the business done at MTN. Thank you very much, Jackie. every single woman here is getting the business done where they need to. And consistency as well. The whole idea of 1955 and 1956 and women consistently going back to make sure that their voices are heard, consistency with everything as women that we decide to take on and make a change in. Thank you so much, Jackie, for that amazing, amazing story. Well, we are going to move to our keynote address for today. I'm quite excited to welcome Umama Ujesi Duarte, the Deputy Secretary General of the ANC.
More good. Ladies, let me say women and the few men who are in the room. Oh, mask, thank you. The only problem with what I have to do is it's all on my phone, and intermittently this phone rings and it will interrupt my speech. It's a great honor for me to be here today, and I'm really grateful that the PBF invited me to attend this function and have the privilege of hearing Phoebe and Jackie speak and give the context of where we come from, and in particular, actually correcting the context of where we come from. But I'd just like to add one bit of history, that the first march of women was in 1905, led by women from the Free State, who's already started the journey of protest against being separated from their families when the mining industry began to grow. They did not allow women to join the miners in the compounds of the mining industry. So women were left behind primarily in the Free State to fend for themselves and actually starved, frankly speaking. So we mustn't forget this context of how the capitalist construct, respectfully, Jackie, I know that MTN is a big company and supports many good things, but the concept of patriarchy is directly invested into capitalism, where women are kept at the bottom of the rung, in the hope of rising up. But I do want to say that I want to start my speech with a poem I wrote the other night when I was watching the horrendous story of a young woman, a student, was hacked to death by her boyfriend, put in a suitcase and left on the side of the curb like she meant nothing. And I want to say that I wrote this, and I hope you don't mind me sharing it with you, because I don't share my poetry very often. But I never actually share my poetry because, who cares? Women of South Africa, we see you. Women of South Africa, we see the great strides you make. We see how you are slayed and killed, beaten. We see that no policy on paper will protect you. We see that speeches are just that, speeches. We see you, we must strike back. Our unity is our hope, and we must see each other, and women defend each other. Fight, fight, fight. Now that was the spirit of the women who marched, yes, in October 1955, and repeated that march in 1956, just stronger, more organized, and much more united. Clear in their resolve to change something that fundamentally affected their daily lives. And that's exactly where we are today. We are still the backroom people making sure that everything works. We are still the computers, the woman who actually helped the first United States space rocket to go to space was a black woman, Creola Johnson, in the United States, and she's never recognized. We are still the Charlotte Mcgregors who need to strive to get a university degree to be recognized as credible. That's still who we are. We're still the people who make the business work. We're still the people who make men shine. We are that. And it is honestly time that we as women gave each other a boost in the back and pushed each other forward and not feel the fear of a genuinely strong woman who can make other women shine and rise and want to push them down. And unfortunately, we are our own worst enemies, because the minute a woman rises, we criminalize that woman. Suddenly, we have to find fault. What's wrong with her? What has she done in her past that we can use against her? Did she have an affair? While men have affairs every minute of every day, who cares? But we are still scarlet lettered. We are still given a negative connotation. So Comrade Phoebe gave you the statistics. And one of the statistics she talks about, which is must be our fight for now, is equal work for equal pay. And throughout the history of this country, there's never been equal work for equal pay. Race and gender determined where women stood at the bottom of that pyramid. And if you are promoted, you're always promoted with just a little less money than the man who was there in the same job, doing an atrocious job, was doing before you, because you were there helping him be successful. Patriarchy is stubborn. Toxic masculinity is the order of the day today. It is. And what I would like, my message to you today is, I totally and absolutely respect and admire Charlotte Mcgregor. I admire Albertina Sisulu, who was in the crowd in 1956, one of the organizers, hardly seen except in 2 little clips that I came across in recent years. Helen Joseph, who was this remarkable woman who was so organized. She planned, she wrote, she kept records of what must be done. She understood the timetable of the trains, and that was her as the secretary putting it forward. You know, I admire them, but you know what? I want to be led by a woman who was born in 1990 now. Yes, it is time. I want to be led by a young, vigorous, intelligent, educated, or not so educated woman, but a woman of spirit, a woman who will take me by the hand and say, walk me through where I need to go. Take me by the hand, not me taking her by the hand. We seem to be so afraid of our youth. And the youth seem to be afraid of us. I don't understand why, no, never. You know, I really don't understand why. But we fear each other. We fear my history, which is, yes, I think I'm a socialist feminist. I don't care too much for the trimmings. I did wear heels today for the first time in months, and it hurts my feet. Struggling with this thing. Stockings for the first time in months. I'm used to making sure the top half is decent for the Zoom and Teams meeting. So I struggled today, but I thought it's important to be presentable. Why not? You see, I think that our revolution as women has just begun. We're here, we're at the bottom of where our revolution should start, kick off, and really, frankly kick some butt. Primarily our own, because we're trapped in believing that everything that is said in the speeches that men make, they believe in themselves. And I think that the time has come to cut through the middle of those speeches and say, it's all very well to put this policy on paper. Where's the action? I would like to tell you that that action is not going to come from any man holding power. That action is going to come from you sitting here. Whether you are an executive in a company, whether you are a backroom person writing the speeches, whether you are a train operator, whether you're a bus driver, a teacher, a nurse, a doctor, a lawyer, but if you're a woman, your revolution is my revolution. And that revolution is undeniably not asking for equality, but making it happen. When you ask for something, you're admitting that you're unequal. But when you demand it and you make it happen, you're no longer unequal. You're saying, I really don't care what you think, and I don't care where you stand as a male chauvinist. I am telling you that I'm equal to you and my revolution has begun, and I will march wherever I need to march to make you listen. Gender-based violence in our society is by far the worst pandemic, even worse than COVID-19, frankly speaking. It's hidden, it's insidious, and it's highly protected by the authorities in our country. The police talk about gender-based violence from a platform perspective, but police people in the police station have not yet understood the damage that gender-based violence causes for generations to come. Women who have been raped will never recover from that rape. I hope we understand this. You don't recover from a rape. You learn to live with the consequences to your psyche and your body and the damage that it has caused. So don't give us the nonsense about how strong you are when you're a survivor of gender-based violence and rape. You do not survive femicide because you simply lie in a suitcase having been carved up by some idiotic man who is now going to be psychoanalyzed by the best experts in the country. Why did the poor guy do this? He did it, and he did it because he was just venomous towards women. You see, I'm speaking like this because I think it's my birthday month, September, Sipo. So, you know. The point is that we cannot continue to write the policies that are not being implemented. And we put women in positions of power to ask them to implement economic emancipation of women policies. And as soon as they get there, our sisters, they become the sisters of the patriarchy. And they toe the line and they dress the part. It's time to say to those women, we put you there, we respect you, we want you to act on our behalf. And when you don't, we're going to challenge you. The misogynistic males in every instance, let me share a story with you. In 1990, the women of the ANC demanded that we have 30% representation in the NEC of the ANC. Well, I was there and I saw the senior cadre of the movement vote against this resolution. I'm not going to mention names, but all the heroes that I lived with my whole life voted against it. The chairperson, who's now the leader of another political party, was adamant. And we stormed the stage of that meeting. We were very ill-disciplined, and we were threatened, and we were told, we see who you are, but we didn't give up. We got 30%. Later on, it was moved up to 50%, which it is at the moment. But here's the nub. At the moment, we undertook a very brave campaign perspective. We invited communities to select the candidates for local government. Sadly, women voted for men. And very few women were voted as councillors by our own process in the ANC. And where were the women put? In the ghetto of the section of the electorate that would be considered after you count the votes. I'm sharing this with you because I think if we don't tell the truth now, we will never change anything in this country. And women in provinces were threatened by men to say, don't stand as a councillor. They were visited at their homes at night. Others were told, listen, if you don't stand, we'll make sure that you're going to be looked after. I'm a poor woman. I live in a two-roomed house, and somebody says to me, don't stand, but I'm the right candidate. I understand the community's issues. Some man is going to come. But the argument that frightens me is the one where women say men are breadwinners. And I say to you today, they're not breadwinners on their own. They are supported to be where they are by women throughout this country. So, you know, we've made great strides. We have. We have 47% of women cabinet ministers. We have 50% of women sitting in the parliament. All very good and well. But it is time for us to look beyond positioning women in particular spaces and fighting for the emancipation right from the bottom up. The Women's League of the ANC, whom I'm a member of, and Comrade Sybil, my leader in the branch, I must make sure that I acknowledge you so that next time I come to the branch, I don't get whacked. Women have to be braver than we are at the moment. And we must be loyal. I'm loyal to the ANC. I am its Deputy Secretary General, and I will never allow the ANC to fall down. Never, ever. Not in my lifetime. But I will also fight for emancipation of women within the ANC and outside of the ANC. Because if I am what I think I am, which is a revolutionary, I cannot not do that. I want to say one last thing to you. We're all looked at from the outside of our skin. Nobody really understands who you are inside until you tell them. And you know, Jackie, as a journalist, I need to say this to you. It's very hard to be a woman leader in this country. You folks just hate us. For whatever reason, why, I have not understood. But you will never write a good story about a woman who is leading. You look for the negative side, you see? But why? It's because the media is where patriarchy is located at its foundation. It cannot change unless we change it, right? And I think that we, beyond fighting the media, we have to help them grow. Okay, I understand that all the CEOs of all the media we own in this country are men, Sipho. But I want to make a proposal to the PBF and women in business, progressive women in business. If the CEO is a man, the chairperson of the board must be a woman. I put that challenge to you. I can concede that if the CEO is a woman, maybe you can give some man a chance to be the chair of the board. Maybe. Turn it around. Why are we all deputies? Here's this wonderful editor of, you know, a deputy editor. Deputy Secretary General. Deputy this, deputy that, deputy everything. Deputizing. We must lead. No one is going to give us permission to lead. We need not ask for permission to lead. Because when you ask for permission, you've already lost the game. Time for permission asking is gone. So as we end this August the 9th, and Victoria Mcgregor, I really admired the fact that she was so brave that she went to get a degree. She came back, she attended the NEC, but she wasn't a member of that NEC. Wasn't elected. They elected the men. But she should have been perhaps the Secretary General first of the ANC. The time has come, and I say this boldly, we can no longer take the argument, Sipho, that the top 6 of the ANC must all be men and 1 deputy woman. We've been deputizing from the days of Cheryl Carolus, and she was a great leader, is a great leader, followed by every other deputy. And when the men disappear, we act for them. Boldness is where we have to be right now. I was never a shy flower, sitting in the back, making sure my nails were properly tended. If I brush my hair at all, it's a miracle. Ladies, comrades, we have to accept that we have a right in this country. We are citizens. We actually are the majority of citizens in this country. We're not a minority. And we behave like a minority though, because we keep on asking for permission to be there. Stop. So I want to make, and I'm making this proposal very sincerely, Sipho. If PBF is sincere about the emancipation of women, the demands in the economy must be for the emancipation of women in the economy. I believe that the structure of our economy does not work for all the people of this country. And therefore, we must transform it, and it must be radical transformation. And we mustn't be afraid that the captains of industry are going to say, here they come again. They don't like the word revolution. They don't like the word radical. Well, tough. You're not going to change this economy if you do not transform it radically and change the structure of an economy that is still held in the hands of a very wealthy 10%. And the rest of us work for them to continue to be wealthy 10%ers. Time has come to change that. And you're not going to change it by polite conversations only. You also have to change it with hard, very clear, very unapologetic conversations about what you want. But it must be a conversation. And I'm for dialogue. Ready to dialogue with the captains of industry to help them to understand why you do not undermine 54% of your productive and active workforce, as you are doing as men in this country. You promote it and you make sure that it is skilled enough to carry forward what you need to do. So I do want to say, I love the ANC. I'm saying it unapologetically. I'm not afraid to say so. I love the ANC because it's a liberation movement, and it will continue to be a liberation movement. It's not a political party. And it is that perhaps sets us apart from other people. So I want to thank you for bringing me here. And maybe you're sorry now. But don't be sorry. Because you see, there is the future sitting. A young person born in the 90s who will carry the vision that women like Charlotte Mcgregor brought here, who will build non-racialism, because that is the other thing that is regressing, is a non-racial society, but who will also not allow regression of the emancipation of women. And I want to thank you for inviting me very much.
Wow. Comrade. Definitely a comrade for women's emancipation. Thank you very much, comrade. Deputy Secretary General Jessie Duarte, from another deputy. Your speech was very touching and enlightened us a lot. I think even in the media industry, some of the things that Wamutjesi has said made me think of how do we begin actually in the media industry to start dismantling what we're seeing across all the different sectors, and what kind of stories should we be talking about and telling through our different platforms as the Mail and Guardian and as other media houses. Thank you so much, Jessie. This just some of the things that she had mentioned about our revolution having just begun, that is so important. That stayed with me and will continue to stay in my mind, and thinking about different ways of how do we continue our revolution, and that we should no longer be asking. No, we're not asking for permission anymore. We are going to do the work. We are going to take what is ours and we're going to do the work and make the change. Such a telling speech, and such a kind of deeply motivating for me, deeply motivating. And I hope it is for everybody else that is watching out there and everybody here today. Some of those words that we take with us today when we're done here.